Welcome to the Advanced Apes videocast. My name's Cadell Last, author and creator of the Advanced Apes. I'm here today with Hisham Kelati, our weekly contributor and comedian. How's it
How you
going,
doing?
Hisham?
Not too bad. How are you?
Pretty good. We're going to be talking about something a little mind-blowing. A good way to spend our Easter and to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about deep time, which is something, or also called, also frequently called either geologic time or cosmic time. It's time basically that is conceptualized as time that's essentially alien to the human mind. Times that are far larger than thousands of years. Sometimes we're talking hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, and even billions of years. And really, I think Stephen Jay Gould said it best when he sort of said that, to study deep time, you also have to accept that the human mind has not evolved to be able to comprehend deep time. And so in order to really gain a perspective on it, you have to really learn how to develop an abstract or intellectual understanding of deep time. And for me, that takes some thinking. It takes a lot of thought. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of contemplation, because on a day-to-day time scale, humans are really only comfortable thinking about things in terms of, or really used to thinking about things in terms of days or weeks or months or years or decades or sometimes centuries.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we conceptualize our lives. That's how we live our lives. So for you, Hisham, I'm interested, was this your first, when you were doing research, was this your first, the first time you had encountered the idea of deep time? Or
Yes.
had it been something that it had played a role in your life before?
No, this in passively in just from discussions about the universe with friends, it was just we would refer to we would say something like 13 billion years, 10 billion years, 100 million years, and while I said these units of time, I never really grasped how ridiculously massive a concept it would be to think in hundreds of millions of years, or let alone billions of years. And so when I was doing the research into deep time and had it conceptualized into a unit of measurement that I could comprehend, days, hours, seconds, years, it was frightening how just mind-bogglingly massive the unit of time in terms of billions of years. I honestly can't grasp it.
Right. So I'm interested when you said in the past, you'd talk with your friends maybe about the origin of the universe or evolution. And I think to some degree, a lot of people talk about these things at some point in their life. And you said you guys would just toss around the idea of millions of years and billions of years and not really fully understand it. Do you think that we do that because it's just too alien to really to approach a deep understanding of those things? Or why? I mean, I'm getting at why did you just toss those numbers around without letting it sink in, or what was the thought process involved?
I think because at no point I was like beforehand I was ever, for lack of better words, let's say taught to understand or conceptualize that massive a unit of measurement, or just a time frame, that it was just something like, it was almost like regurgitation. When your graded science teacher would try to explain to you, the idea of evolution from dinosaurs up until Homo sapiens, she would just write on the board 65 million years, and it was a fact, 65 million years. And because there was no further discussion or elaboration in terms of like that idea, it was just a fact in my head. 65 million years, 30 million years, universe is 13 billion years old, and it was just I carried on. But
Right.
So I guess that may have just been it. Like my inability to really grasp is just because there was really no forward education in terms of that. But also, and this is just to me, it is just it's just too massive a concept for me to try to conceptualize. And I guess maybe that's just a bit of a fear of just being like, you know what, too hard. No, I'm gonna go have a drink. I don't want to bother anymore. No, I'm done.
So in your day-to-day life and in your own intellectual past, what has been your understanding of time? Do you just sort of do you think about time on the scale of your own life? Do you use your own life as the metric with which to work?
Yes, I completely do, and I think I can talk to most people that in terms of just time, it's what am I doing in the next 20 minutes? What am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to plan in the next 3 or 4 months? And even then, I don't go any further than 6 months ahead in terms of forward-thinking times, just because that's, to me, too long a time to try to be putting things in or just conceptualizing months in advance. And in terms of past, I've only got around to thinking, being in my mid-20s, that I can say I've been around for at least 2 decades. But even then, in terms of a decade, it's a measurement of time that I wouldn't be able to, at least currently in my state, be able to conceptualize versus, let's say, someone who's been around for 75 years. So they've been around for at least 7 decades, and it can at least think because they've lived for that long in that time, in regards to that time frame. But for me, I'm thinking most like chunks of 6 months at best.
So do you think are you trying to say that the longer you've been alive, the easier it is to conceptualize large periods of time on a human scale?
For me, I would agree with that. Yeah.
What about for a historian? I mean, if you're a historian of human history and you have to talk about ancient history and you have to talk about the development of civilization and things like that, you have to move into the area of centuries and thousands of years. Do you think that
I think people like that have a stronger grasp because they've been forced or at least educated to understand, or they've read materials, they've spent their lives conceptualizing that level of time frame, so they can think in from 1600 to 1850. This is what happened, and they can articulate and personally understand the growth in terms of that large group of time. And so I think, in terms of deep time, people who have attempted to try to graph in a chronological order like what's happened, they have the capacity because I guess they've had to learn to conceptualize in terms of that time frame or grouping of time frames. But as a guy who doesn't know what I'm going to be doing 20 minutes from now, being able to understand what was done 20 million years ago, let alone 2 billion years ago, I'm not even going to bother.
Okay. So I guess what my approach was, because I've got for me and anyway on a personal level, deep time's something that's always fascinated me, and it's something that I think that I use to help build my own intellectual framework in some sense. I just found it fascinating. And what I found useful was that I sort of waded into the deep end, sort of thing. That's how I found the best approach to understanding large scales of time. So I felt like, okay, if I sit and I just read and try and understand phenomena that occur on the scale of thousands of years, then I can feel comfortable moving back a little further, like get a little further into the deep end, and then I can start and think about things that happen on scales of hundreds of thousands of years, and so on and so forth, and in that way, I'm just not confronted with 1 billion years right away. I can work my way up to it.
I'm still in a life jacket, like in a kiddie pool at this point. I'm not even going to attempt to dip a toe and the actual lake. Yeah, that is oof,
Right, because it
oof.
just gets a little scarier the deeper you go. Is that why?
Oh, you have no idea. It's amazing that more people haven't panicked at the idea of how beautifully insignificant we are as a species
Yeah.
when you legitimately break it down from the Big Bang up until right now. Because when I did doing the research, I had it broken down into a unit of measurement that I could understand, a year, and they, based on arguably give or take specific dates in the year, these were monumental
Yeah.
points in just the history of the universe. And when it came to us as humans, we're just the last fleeting few seconds on December 31st at like 11:59.
So what you're explaining is the for anyone who hasn't read it before, I definitely suggest going on to just Googling cosmic calendar and the things it'll pop up on Wikipedia and you'll find articles on it. A lot of them popularized by Carl Sagan. And so basically, what Hisham was explaining was that you have this idea that Carl Sagan popularized that if you take all the history of the universe and express it in one calendar year, that would be an effective metaphorical tool for conceptualizing time scales that are alien to the human mind and would put our existence in proper perspective. So, but at first, I think there's an interesting conversation that we can have here because, you said few people really understand how insignificant we are on the scale of deep time, but yet at the same time everyone sort of knows how, it's just sort of general knowledge, how old the universe is or how old our species is, like, and you'll hear scientific studies all the time come up with new dates that help better explain the history of the universe, but yet it doesn't seem to sink into the gut in a sense that people just see them as numbers, like you were saying. You just think of them as facts, but you don't think any deeper than that about it. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that you just see the number and you don't, and it doesn't sink in any further? Is it because we need that metaphorical tool for it to sink in?
I genuinely think that, mostly because in terms of our ability to understand numbers and to an extent time, we've been raised with certain restrictions and a specific paradigm. Because like even when we think in terms of the last century, between 1900 and 2000, we conceptualize it by the decades, the 1910s, 1920s, the 30s, the 40s, and there's a specific idea based on each decade. But even then, being able to group it and be like, that was 100 years, that is just mind-boggling to me. And I think, in all honesty, if it affected me more on a daily level, I'd be able to understand huge groups of time. But because it doesn't, I don't bother. I don't let it sink in.
Okay, well, I think I have a interesting question. So there's a group of people that formed an organization called the Long Now Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and they formed it 2 decades ago. I don't know if you've heard of them,
Yes.
but their goal is to embed the idea of deep time into
Mm-hmm.
the collective consciousness of humanity. And they think that the way to do this is to create a clock
Mm-hmm.
that symbolic, and it's symbolic because it will be designed to last 10,000 years, and it will be a clock that measures time on the scale of 10,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it will tick every century, and it will bong every millennia, and it will like cuckoo on the 10,000 year mark or something like that, like that. But the point of the clock will be to help people confront that much time.
Mm-hmm.
To see something created by humans that functions on a scale of time that is not something that we're familiar with.
Yeah.
So it would be as if, they compare it to back in the 19th century when we started to realize how old the Earth was, and you could go to the Grand Canyon and you could look
Hmm.
out at the Grand Canyon and you could be slapped in the face with billions of years of erosion and geological processes that carved out that canyon. So do you think having a, an a symbolic object like the long now clock,
Hmm.
do you think that would do anything to our global understanding of time and perspective in that way?
I honestly I do, and I love the idea for the project because you're giving something a clock, a tool, specifically a clock that globally everyone is aware of in terms of a tool that measures time, and it's something that from something childlike, very very basic that people can grasp, and it's measuring how long a unit of time we can't grasp um, goes, how long it goes. So like a century, a decade, century, millennia, and I honestly think, like in 500 years, when people are looking at that clock and it chimes at 2500, that they'll have to, or at least during that time, they'll have evolved with an understanding that this clock, this thing that I understand was built 500 years ago, and they'll be able to conceptualize that, and because it'll be a literal like thing they can look at, and if the project is successful and it manages to seep into just the general subconscious in terms of being able to grasp that, I think there'll be kind of there will be a cultural shift, but people will be able to understand the history of the universe a lot better because they'll be from a very just in terms of pop culture, they'll be able to grasp it because something is there that they can see and understand. And the only reason I can tell in terms of how long a day, a month, a year is because I have a calendar present, and it's something that I can track down very very easily. Being able to have that, a daily calendar that
Mhm.
measures in decades and centuries and millennia,
Mhm.
if it works, and I don't know how well it could work, but if it does work, I honestly think it would allow people to better understand the history of the universe. They'll be able to conceptualize, which is the
Yeah,
problem.
or at least they'll be able to put the human existence as a
Oh.
whole in better perspective.
Which
Because
would, I think, be devastating to most people.
right. So, but with the clock that's designed to work for 10,000 years, I think the
Hmm.
creators made a good point that it's sort of like a good halfway mark because
Hmm.
civilization has been around for about 10,000 years, give or
Uh-huh.
take, like depending on how much you want to get into an argument with archaeologists about the meaning of civilization and the start of that. But we can just say that
Hmm.
as a rough. I don't think it's too controversial to use that as a rough halfway point of 10,000 years.
Hmm.
But when I say it'll help people contextualize humanity's existence,
Hmm.
that's sort of how long we've been building cities
Yes.
and making complex tools beyond something like the Acheulean and the Mousterian
Hmm.
and making abstract art and basically being human in a way that most humans on the planet can relate to in
Yeah.
some way. So I think in that sense it will give people a larger perspective on the civilization we've built and how long we've been on the planet.
Hmm.
And that could be, I think, a useful tool to me. I think that the biggest problem at the moment is that, not the biggest problem, but one of the problems is that deep time isn't really thought of by many world leaders or international organizations in a way that I would like to see. Because if you think on the scale of deep time, then suddenly um, you see our existence from a different perspective.
Hmm.
So, do you think that knowledge of these time scales in a deep way should be some sort of prerequisite or should factor in a little more? with world leaders and in the geopolitical arena?
It would be nice, but I don't think it would happen for a while. Realistically, most things governments do are short-term, have short-term effects. Like, arguably, like, let's just say Obama staving off the what would have been the second depression with the stimulus package. That's fine, but that is only effective now. Being able to put in specific economic policies that would allow for a stability to occur would take something like 50 years, but that's somebody else's problem. That's too far down the road. We need a realistic positive effect now, because now is happening and now is what we can understand. But realistically, I think it would be amazing if, I shouldn't say realistically, but it would be amazing if governments could think of putting in specific policies that it would take, let's say, 50 years to occur, but at the end of 50 years, everything would be okay. Instead of putting a Band-Aid, you go and you do major surgery and you recover from the surgery, and it would usually take 50 years. But there's no time. People can't understand 50 years. They think it's ineffective because it's not going to help them now. And I think once that happens, what required for that to happen would be for people to understand that, while it may not be good for me now, it will be good for my grandkids. They have to think in terms of not themselves in the present, but for future unborn generations later, which is something that people can't grasp because it's about, like, the only time frame they can understand is my time frame, my generation, my 60 to 70 years on the planet.
And there's a few philosophers at the I've recently become obsessed with the Future of Humanity Institute, which is an institute at Oxford University. It's a new institute, and it's a collective group of thinkers and academics from different fields: philosophy, history, anthropology, economics. And a lot of the people at that institute have sort of proposed that the biggest moral imperative at the moment is making sure that we think and act responsibly for the untold billions or trillions of sentient beings that aren't here yet. And when you put it in the perspective of, say, we've got 7 billion people on our planet now. We've actually got more people on our planet now than probably existed throughout all of human history. And when you think about if our population continues to grow, and who knows what the future trajectory of population growth really is, especially when you talk in terms of sentient minds, maybe it is the biggest moral imperative. I don't know what you think about that, because if we exist on the scale of, say our civilization exists on the scale of another 10,000 years, or say our civilization exists on the scale of another 100,000 years, right? Then that's a lot. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people, and I think we do have a responsibility to make our world a place where those people can have better lives than what we have.
Yeah, but it's 100,000 years from now. Why do I have to worry about it, huh? Which is, I think, most people's reactions to hearing something like that.
Okay, so do you think that if thinkers at the Future of Humanity Institute propose that to world leaders, saying that the biggest moral imperative is to care for the future billions and trillions of sentient minds that that aren't here yet, do you think that is just not going to resonate?
Not at all. Not when they have to worry about getting the debt ceiling extended for another 30 days. Unless you start talking unless it's a massive cultural shift and everyone starts talking in terms of periods of times that are longer than, let's say, decades, then it ain't gonna happen. It should, but it won't for a while.
But when we really apply this philosophy of, I call it a philosophy of deep
Mm-hmm.
time, we get into some of maybe the biggest philosophical questions that humanity faces. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
um, it really, I think it boils down to, do we collectively want to be around for thousands of years? Do we collectively want that? Do we care about that? Do we care about our existence as a collective more than we care about our own individualness?
Oh God, no! Are you kidding me? Everyone's in it for themselves at this point, and uh, if that's just basically proven by just there being wars or just any type of conflict based on any type of uh, you know superficial identity like skin, your gender, your race, nationality, religion. Um, and until we've kind of all collectively come together and realized we're all human, we're all the same species, regardless of whatever color or whatever we believe in, we're all the same.
Let, let
That
me let me
is
let
what would
me
require to
propose
be.
let me propose this to you then. There's have you ever heard of the overview effect?
No.
The overview effect is the feeling that comes over astronauts when they look back and see our planet from space for the first time.
Mm.
And when they overwhelmingly when people see our planet from space for the first time, they sort of have that dawning epiphany that, they don't see the world in terms of borders anymore. They don't see the world in terms of races anymore, because it seems silly when you see the planet from space. And we can all go on Google and see the blue marble picture from '70s, and we can all go on Google and see see what our planet looks like from space. So I think, if you really take the time, you don't really have to go to space to get that feeling. But you don't, and I think it's a philosophy that is becoming growingly popular. So I pose it to you as someone who maybe hasn't thought about it before. But do you care about our species' existence on the scale of thousands of years, or is that something that you just think is irrelevant?
As it'll come from a strange place, but I honestly do. I'm a huge sci-fi nerd, and I love the watching all these films and TV shows about how us as a species have been able to conquer the unknown. We evolved from these knuckle dragging primates who crawled out from the darkest corner of the cave and looked out onto the world. We built empires from nothing on this planet.
Hey,
And
don't mock knuckle walking as a mode of locomotion. That is an
that,
equally good mode of locomotion.
it
I'm
is
just
true, but there's something about standing erect and running on two legs. And I honestly think that the next step for us as a species would be to leave the Earth, to leave home, and just launch ourselves into the deep recesses of the unknown, the blackest of black points in the corners of the universe. And I would like our species to be able to evolve to the point where we hit the next level. What happens? There was the Cro-Magnon, Homo erectus, Homo sapien. I want to see what the next step for us is in the next 100,000 years, and the only way to do that is if we start thinking as a species in terms of long term. What's going to happen in the next 100 years, the next 500 years, the next 1,000 years? The Dark Ages were a brutal time for us because religion censored any type of scientific progress. That was something like 650 years. That 650 is a huge chunk of time that there was basically no scientific evolution. But had we had that, in terms of now, in 2013, we would have, that's 650 years of evolution that we weren't given. And I would have loved to have seen where we would have been now if had we had that. But you know what? We
let,
didn't.
let,
We
let,
just
let
move
me
on
just
forward.
let me just let before um before we move forward, let me just say that during the Dark Ages, there was tremendous scientific progress. It just happened in the Middle East.
Fair enough.
And so the Dark Ages is sort of
A
a
misnomer, I guess.
a cultural, it's sort of like a historical construct that we have been impacted by because of a Eurocentric understanding of history.
Yes.
But point
Fair
taken.
enough.
But point taken overall. Um, yeah. So, but I think what I really liked about your point was that you were thinking about the next stage of evolution, because if you think about our species on the scale of hundreds of thousands of years, yeah, there has been a biological transition from different species to our present form. And what is the next step? It's something I think more people should be thinking about. But before we can start thinking about that in an intellectually sound way, we have to get deep time into the gut.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I really respect organizations like the Long Now Foundation. And I really think that metaphors like Carl Sagan's Cosmic Calendar,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a great site that I definitely recommend checking out, everyone, called deeptime.info. And that is just takes all of Earth history and it puts it onto a 12-hour clock. And if you really want to be humbled, there's just fool around with that for a few minutes. It's a really great infographic. So I don't know. I guess the final question I have before we wrap up here is, let's say, because you sort of made the point before that our understanding of time is culturally malleable, like that we can change our understanding of time,
Mm-hmm.
and we've done so in the past, and potentially in the future we'll have technology to or build things that will help us understand time on different levels.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the world would be a very different place if we embedded in our cultural consciousness a notion of deep time?
Oh, for sure. There, there wouldn't be such a level of. Well, I guess maybe it depends, but there'd be a shift in terms of urgency. I think people. It's all about perspective. Like, especially when we were discussing the whole like astronauts in space. That is it's a very humbling thing to be on a space station or the moon and to look at it and be able to put your thumb out. I think this is a story, an anecdote of one of the astronauts put, but he put a thumb out, and the entirety of human existence ceased to exist. I'm going to put his thumb there because the Earth wasn't there anymore. And it is
Yeah.
about perspective. And once our general understanding of the universe has changed because of I guess a cultural understanding of deep thought or deep time. Sorry, deep thought, deep time. It will be good for us. It'll take some time, but it will be good for us.
Yeah, and I think it will have practical utility as well, because there are environmental phenomenon that occur on larger timescales than we're used to
Mhm.
experiencing, and if we're going to stick around for the long haul, we better adjust to understanding those processes. So I don't know if you have any concluding thoughts, but what was this experience like? Do you think that you're going to familiarize yourself with these concepts a little more? Or are you gonna
I may
retreat?
have to eat a few hash brownies before I start delving into the idea of deep time. But I think just for anyone who's hesitant about trying to, I guess, engage in the idea of deep time, it's very humbling. It is honestly beautiful how insignificant we are, let alone humanity is, in terms of just the time frame. But I honestly also think that it's a thing of pride that in the last 10 seconds of a year, we've managed to go from knuckle draggers to where we are now, to having put a man on the moon. And I honestly think that if we can shift our understanding and accept deep time for what it is, that our evolution will be faster, it'll be more exponential, and it'll be good for the species.
So basically, what's going to happen in the next 10 seconds?
Oh.
Who knows? Who knows? And that's up for debate. But it's an interesting conversation, and it's a conversation I think more people should be having. Um, I agree with you. I think that understanding deep time is incredibly humbling. I think that it adds more. It doesn't take away. You
Yeah.
can you can still think about humans on the scale of years. You can still think about humans on the scale of decades. That doesn't go away. You just gain new time scale perspective, which in my mind can only add. It can only give you a different perspective, not only on humanity but your own life as well, which is something that is an experience. It's an intellectual experience. It's an abstract experience, but it's one that we have the knowledge to create now. So I definitely like Hisham. I say that definitely if you have the time, look into it, read about it. It's something that may change your worldview. So Hisham, I'll end on that. Where can people find you?
If you want more comedic relief, look us up at qbkidsproductions.com and follow us on Twitter at qbkids.
Okay, and you had a World Today segment on YouTube, but that's come to an end, right? Am I right? And so what's the next step for QB Kids?
We're moving on to a brand new narrative comedy web series called QB Kids Presents, and it's coming out May 1st, 2013. So mark it on your calendars. It will be funny. And
Okay,
if
and
you
that's
don't
on
think it's
YouTube?
funny, yes, it will be. And if you don't think it's funny, it's free, so stop complaining.
Okay, I agree. And you can find me on theadvancedapes.com, on our blog network, videocast, and YouTube channel. And you can contact me on Facebook, fb.com/theadvancedapes, as well as on Twitter at theadvancedapes and at Cadell Last. So thanks again for joining me, Hisham, and we'll see you next week.